How's it going? Hope everyone's doing well. My name is Jeff. Welcome back to my cave of cool books. As you can see, I'm kind of filming at one of my other angles, not on my main bookshelf, but my mystery and miscellaneous bookshelves here. And today I want to do a little week 2 update for Horror Mayhem. What is Horror Mayhem, you might ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's a reading event here on BookTube created by the Bookish Bryants. This year it's Horror Mayhem World Tour. Might be the 4th year. I'm not quite sure how long this has been going. Unfortunately, Scott Bryant passed away a couple of years ago, and this event is dedicated to him. And it's about reading short horror fiction, horror books, novels, novelettes, novellas, short stories under 200 or 250 pages, thereabouts. And I talked last week about some H.P. Lovecraft and some Hellboy and some other cool stuff. And this week I have another couple of things by some famous horror writers, older writers for the most part. The first I'm going to talk about is pretty famous source material. The story itself, many people might not have read, but they certainly have probably seen movie adaptations based off of this. And that is Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. Now, I read this novella. I guess it's classed as a novella, according to Wikipedia. I read this in the back of this, the Best of John W. Campbell collection from Ballantine Del Rey. It's one of the Ballantine Best Ofs. And I have a pretty decent, copy of this one. And apparently this was one of 2 sources where the 14-chapter version of this story, Who Goes There, was introduced. Now, the story was published first in Astounding Science Fiction by John W. Campbell, and he was already the editor of that magazine at that time. It was published in the August 1938 issue, and I believe Campbell took over in like March or April or something. So maybe to avoid outright, I guess nepotism is the wrong word, but taking advantage of your editorship position, he published this story under the name Don A. Stewart. And it was published in 12 chapters in the Astounding Science Fiction magazine, the Pulp magazine, and then later subsequently in a couple of different editions, including this one, The Best of John W. Campbell, in a 14-chapter version. But apparently his original version was even longer, and it was called Frozen Hell. And I think some other cool booktubers have talked about Frozen Hell. I don't have a copy of that. It was published not so long ago in a 158-page version, I believe. So quite a bit longer and extended. Why is this story famous? Well, it's, of course, the origin story for all the movies called The Thing, starting in 1951, directed by Howard Hawks. The Thing from Another World. Fantastic classic science fiction. I won't hesitate to even use the word B-movie. It was produced by Howard Hawks, directed by Christian Nyby, supposedly, but word on the street is that, Hawks was there and pretty much calling the shots. It has that overlapping dialogue that is so characteristic of a Howard Hawks movie. It's got a lot of sharp, fun dialogue. And, James Arness, before he became Marshall Matt Dillon in Gunsmoke, plays the giant, inimicable alien carrot-type creature. Quite a bit different from the original story, but a very fun movie. And then John Carpenter, the director John Carpenter, who did Halloween and, The Fog and many other cool movies, he was a huge fan of The Thing from Another World, which came out in 1951. So in 1982, his version of The Thing, just called The Thing, starring Kurt Russell and several other good character actors, was released to little fanfare in 1982. 1982 was the summer that Blade Runner and The Thing both premiered the same week as E.T., Steven Spielberg's E.T. And E.T. went on to be a monster hit, and Blade Runner and The Thing died at the box office, sadly, but have since went on to massive cult classic status since then, and are avowed, both of them, acknowledged science fiction classics. And The Thing might just be the best science fiction movie you'll ever see, and it's certainly the best science fiction horror movie you'll ever see. A decade or so ago, I think they made some kind of a prequel to the thing, which I didn't bother watching. It was probably okay, but not necessary. So the thing that John Carpenter did, his version, although it's a darker take on Campbell's original short story, it is much, much more faithful to it than the 1951 Howard Hawks version. So what happens in the story? Well, if you've seen the movie, and that's probably one of the reasons why I waited so long to read this original novella is, how are you going to top the movie? But the book is really good, and it gives some kind of different viewpoint of the movie. And when you take it into historical context, how it kind of influenced various movies, let alone the movie adaptations. It's very impressive and very interesting. So the basic setup is there is a kind of, I guess, a scientific base down in Antarctica, and the story moves pretty fast. There is a lot of exposition at the beginning, but we're kind of in media res when we start the story. They've already found this an exploration team, or I should say a team that was going out to look at this, I guess, ice shelf. There's 37 men down here in this base, and investigating various things, cosmic rays, and metals and minerals and weather patterns. It's biology, etc. There's a doctor, a biologist, an engineer, chief helicopter pilot, etc. And so several of the men went out. They found something strange. Their radar detectors were going off, going nuts. Something 80 miles away from the exact South Pole was showing up a massive magnetic, radar image. And so they went down there expecting something big, some kind of metallic deposits or something. And what they find is basically a spaceship buried under lots and lots of ice, tons of ice. Maybe it landed 50, 20 million years ago or something, thousands and thousands upon thousands of years ago. And it's shaped kind of like a submarine without a conning tower or any sort of aerial veins or anything. And it's way under the ice, and next to it are a few different black blobs of something. And they go down there, they dig one. One is closer to the surface, and they dig it out, and it's in a big block of ice, and it's this alien creature, which is described as being pretty gnarly looking. 3 blazing with hate red eyes, and a bunch of things, kind of blue skin and bright crimson tentacle-y sort of hair coming out all over its face and neck, etc. And they tried to get out to excavate the spaceship, but they're using thermite, which sets off some kind of charge and destroys the whole ship, and they survive and bring this thing back. And all along, it's apparent that they've been getting what they think of are nightmares from this creature in the block of ice, which everyone presumes is dead, long dead. Of course, if anyone's seen the movies, they know it's not. And like the Carpenter movie, this thing is not just one alien. It's a creature that can shapeshift, take over, and copy images of any living creature, and pretty soon become an almost seamless copy of that thing and duplicate all over the place, and there's a danger of it taking over the world. Of course, they bring this back to the they don't know this yet, of course, but they bring it back to the main base, and of course it thaws out, disappears from the block of ice, and all havoc breaks loose, starting with the sled dogs, moving on to, they have some cows also in there to kind of milk, etc. And pretty soon everyone's looking at everyone else, wondering, who goes there? Are you human? Are you this evil alien that just wants to destroy and take over everybody? Just to kind of go back a little bit, in the story of the movie, MacReady, played by the great Kurt Russell in one of his all-time best performances, real kind of gruff, tough helicopter pilot. In the story, MacReady is an engineer, I believe, and he is not he's not a helicopter pilot. He's not described like Kurt Russell, but he is described basically like Doc Savage. He's this giant 6'4" guy, bronze skin, bronze eyes, bronze beard and hair. He's kind of kind of natural leader. It's almost like Doc Savage went undercover or, under a different identity and joined this kind of exploration team. Although he is the main guy through most of the story and does come up with a couple of solutions to the problem. He's, of course, more human scale than Doc would be, of course, but it's kind of cool to think, is this an influence from Doc Savage, this guy? And what's cool also, if you're a fan of the John Carpenter movie, a lot of the characters that are in the movie have the same name. Some of them are changed around to their positions, but there's still a Dr. Blair, who's the biologist, Dr. Copper, played by Richard Dysart in the movie, and Dr. Blair was played by Wilford Brimley in Carpenter's movie. And we get Norris and a few other character names that are familiar from that seminal horror film from 1982. The difference, I guess, in this one is, it's a lot more. Campbell does a really good job kind of getting across the kind of sweaty, dank environs of this Antarctic base and of the plight that the men are in. They're a little more, they do fight and things, but they're a little more, and kind of have divisive opinions and disagree with each other. And, some of them go a little crazy, a little wacky with the realization of what's going on, similar to what happens in the movie. But they're a little more accepting of the fate that they may not make it out of here, that they may have to do something to make sure the thing doesn't make it out. This one goes a little bit different sort of an ending than the Carpenter movie does, other than there is kind of the same realization that one of the things is building a craft or trying to build a craft, or at least something, if not a spaceship, something that will help them get off the ice of Antarctica and back to greater civilization where they can spread their gross alien conquering sort of shape-shifting genes or whatever. Anyhow, it's a fun story, cool story, a little talky in parts, but again, Campbell really nails the atmosphere of this place, the atmosphere of fear which develops, the kind of pragmatic efforts of guys like McCready and a few others to try to come up with a solution, to come up with a way to test who is who and how to deal with the aliens, etc. The aliens things in the story, the alien thing is definitely nightmarish and very scary kind of creature or creatures, but a little easier to kill, certainly, than you would find in the Carpenter movie. So basically, the story is really good, really interesting to read if you're a fan of the movies, and especially John Carpenter's version. I still think John Carpenter's version is probably the best realization of this particular plot and story. But this original novella was a really good read. I'm glad I read it. Kind of a key cornerstone science fiction novella, and probably the story that John W. Campbell is most famous for. He's more famous perhaps in science fiction circles for his editorship, stewarding many writers and in the golden age of science fiction to produce a lot of great work. And many of his own stories are considered more maybe workmanlike than really impressive. But this one's pretty standout, I think, of his work. I'm curious to read some of his other stories as well. Anyhow, Who Goes There? Pretty cool story. And another one set in Antarctica. So after reading H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness last week for Horror Mayhem and the first week there, which was also set in Antarctica, I kind of wanted to read another yarn, another famous, or one of the most famous horror science fiction tales set in the same place, Antarctica. So that's why I read this one, and I've always been meaning to get around to it. So very cool. In fact, I want to go and watch the Carpenter movie right now after having read it. If I had more time, I would. Okay, after that, then I only had time to fit in a few more stories. I read 2 stories by H.G. Wells from The Valley of Spiders. In fact, I read the titular story, The Valley of Spiders, first, and it was pretty cool story. Kind of an adventure / revenge murder tale with, horrible spiders, basically. Now, this one was published in 1903, and according to Wikipedia, in Pearson's magazine, or Pearson magazine. There's some, I guess, rival speculation that it also appeared in the Strand magazine. But anyway, this story doesn't really name any of its principles. Basically, it starts off quite interestingly. It's a very interestingly written and structured story, and it's quite creepy in parts. So basically, he's not a king, I guess, but maybe someone who's at really high level of power, maybe some kind of lord or duke or something. You get the impression it's somewhere in South America, maybe, or perhaps Mexico, some Latin American country. And this kind of imperious leader, he's just called them, this guy, there's basically 3 men on horseback going into this arid valley in pursuit of a young woman who had apparently fled with a younger man. And the leader is apparently this man of immense power and wealth, one presumes. And all he's described as the man with the silver bridle on his horse. And then there's another man who's got a scar on his face, who's kind of like the right hand segundo to this main guy. And then there's a littler man on a white horse, I think is the idea. And he's very reluctant to be along for the ride. And they're pursuing this young woman who apparently spurned the advances of this cruel, wealthy man with the silver bridle. And, he's not going to let that happen. He's going to pursue this girl into this unknown territory, this unknown valley, to exact his revenge. And on their way down in there, the winds pick up and they see these giant puff balls. These kind of look like almost floating jellyfish, as Wells describes them. And what they are, they're big masses of spiders in these kind of webbed cocoons, and they're floating through the wind. And when it lands on you, bursts out in all these big, size of the body size of your hand or size of a dinner plate, crawls all over you, and then it has, the venom is extremely poisonous. Pretty promptly, the man with the kind of segundo, the kind of right-hand man, henchman of this rich guy, this cruel rich guy, meets his maker, and both of the other 2 men bolt. And, in the process, the man's with the silver bridle, the guy who's pushing this the whole time, he was like, come on, let's go. And the other 2 are like, but because they see all these, before these spider balls come in, they see all these animals running away in deadly fear, right? I think a big wild dog and wild boar and birds and other animals are just getting the hell out of there because they know, chaos is coming in the form of this, I guess, maybe seasonal or occasional spreading of the spiders out across this valley, the Valley of Spiders. And basically, it's the 2 men are left, and the small man, who we followed from his point of view for a while as he kind of looks at this, kind of askance at what this rich dude is doing, and fills us in a little bit on his kind of predilections and character, kind of calls him out for being a coward, just like himself. And what happens after that? The high point of this story is the description of the spiders flying around and the flight away from the spiders to try to escape them as they, land around on the ground and go all over the place. And if they land on you, you're SOL. Basically, very cool story. I'm not sure about what I think of the ending, but it's interesting. Now, after that, I read an earlier story by Wells that's also in this collection. Again, this is a nice Fontana modern novels, although it's not a novel, it's a story collection, but in pretty nice shape. I think I showed this off in my Horror Mayhem 2025 announcement video, but got a giant crab there, and you got this kind of giant jellyfish thing. I don't know if that's supposed to be the floating spider thing. It doesn't look like I imagine it. Imagine like milkweed or big puffs of some kind of plant floating on the sky, but massive and full of spiders. It's a pretty scary situation. The other story I read by him in this book was called The Red Room, and this is a ghost story or a haunted house story. It was published in 1898. and I believe the Idler magazine. And this one is also a really good story. Basically, it's kind of from the point of view, it's being narrated by a 28-year-old guy. He's rather cocky, I guess, and he's come to this house that has a history of a haunted room, and he's, a predecessor had went in to stay in that room, and it ended up dead with a broken neck, falling down the stairs as apparently he ran in panic out of the room. And there are 3 staff members who work in this house. I guess it belonged to this wealthy family. And apparently years and years ago, there was a man who scared his wife to death. He played some sort of, it's only hinted at kind of that he did some sort of cruel prank on her, and she was very timid and easily frightened, and it resulted in her death. So perhaps happened in this room. So the young man is kind of questioning the housekeeper and these 2 attendants, and one has a scar on his face, he's wearing a bandage on his face, and another one, they're hardly looking at him, and they're kind of hostile to him in a way, partly probably because he's a little arrogant, thinking, there's nothing going on in there, I'm going to go prove you wrong. And one man keeps saying, okay, remember, you chose this. Remember, you chose this. Remember, this is your decision. Basically, back out now if you want, buddy. And then the housekeeper keeps saying, on this of all nights, right? And so, anyway, our narrator goes into the room. It gets dark, and they're basically saying, we're not going to take you there until this is the worst night of the year. We're not going in anywhere near that room right now as the dark falls. You're on your own, buddy. Here's a candle for you, etc. And we'll tell you where it is, and you go there. And so the narrator goes up there, and he starts to get a little bit, he's a little uneasy. His kind of arrogance or cockiness is fading slightly as he gets closer to this room. He does see that the housekeeper kindly supplied a whole bunch of candles for him, and he goes around systematically lighting a bunch of candles around this giant room, and he feels the darkness is very oppressive when he gets in there. And he puts candles at the doorway, and he puts candles all over the room and by the drapes, etc., and trying to dispel some of this murky blackness. This room is just so creepingly black and dark, and not a glimmer of light other than this candlelight. Because this is, of course, in 1898. No electricity in this old house. And he's going to go in this room and challenge whatever's in there. Well, he has all these candles lit up, and then suddenly a couple are snuffed out. Not just go out. It's like someone pinched the flame between their fingers or something. Invisible fingers, that's out. And then he runs over there because he's starting to get a little panicky. He's like, I don't want it to be too dark in here. Runs over, relights them, fumbling with the matches. And then as he turns around, the candles over here flick out. And pretty soon, all flick, 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 flick. And he's like trying to hold the candle. And then what happens in there is he just gets gradually more and more panicky. Pretty cool, creepy story. I liked it a lot. Finally, speaking of creepy, I finished with another William Hope Hodgson story. I know I'm pulling out a couple of books that I didn't show in my Horror Mayhem announcement video, but I felt like a William Hope Hodgson. What can I say? I love his horrific sea stories. He spent a lot of time in the, merchant navy or on a merchant vessel, merchant ship, and has a lot of stories probably he heard, and also a lot of imagination. He had a lot of time out there on the ship to think of all sorts of terrible things. Last year I read The Terror in the Water Tank, and I think I also read The Finding of the Graken. But this time I read A Tropical Horror. Now this one is really cool and pretty gnarly, and the action starts right away. So we're on this ship. I guess it's a merchant vessel. So there's a bunch of men, including, for most of the story, the narrator of the story, who turns out to be younger than he sounds. He's 19. And they're on a ship called the Glendoon out of I think it's out of Ireland or out of England, and it's had done a shipment to Australia, and it's on its way back, and it's out in some kind of becalmed seas in the South Pacific. And, the men are trying to pass the time, and there's a guy named Joky, Joky. The narrator doesn't talk much to Joky, but he has a fond feeling for him. He's like a 14-year-old kid or something. He's a young midshipman a young crew member. And there's many men on this ship. We don't get to know many of the others. And basically, one night, the narrator and Joki are out on the kind of bow of the ship or whatever. Some weird, gnarly creature from the depths pokes its massive head up over the leering jaws over the top of the side of the ship and slithers onto the deck. It's a massive sea serpent. Basically, it's described over little snippets here and there through the story, and it's a really strange creature. It's got apparently as thick as a tree trunk, its body, and it's covered with slime, and it leaves slime when it crosses the deck. And it's got like at least one big pincher, like a talon pincher, like a giant lobster, and it's got this tongue that shoots out for dozens of feet, a couple dozen feet, and it's serrated teeth all over it. And you don't necessarily see the results, but you can hear the sickening glick, glick, glick kind of sound as it grabs a human and eats it. So just starts going through the ship and crashing through and plucking people off out of the rigging and smashing through different cabins on the deck and just laying waste to the ship. And the narrator is able to get Joki and himself locked into this little tiny, I guess it's kind of a storeroom or something up on the deck. And luckily they have some food and water, but a lot of the other men don't. And so at night, sometimes when someone's getting very thirsty, another crew member there, the narrator can hear them trying to sneak out, and then an awful scream, and then a glick, glick, glick kind of weird sound. So the sounds that this creature makes when it, I guess, strikes or gets its long, snaky tongue, serrated tongue onto people is gluck, gluck. That's kind of its sound when it's swallowing. It's quite horrifically described. And basically, they think this creature maybe is going to leave, but no, it stays on the ship for a long time and slowly decimating all the people. And then, how the narrator's just going crazier and crazier. He's got to do something. And then what happens at the end. And what another ship that comes and arrives and discovers the wreckage afterwards, and the captain of that ship, our first mate, a story ends with a epistolary sort of, kind of a log entry by this other captain of this rescue ship about what they found there when they got there. It's very kind of creepy and gross and eerie and strange and imaginative, very fun, gnarly little tale. I recommend that one. If you can ever find any collection of William Hope Hodgson's sea set horror stories, I highly recommend them. And this is a very cool Corgi edition I've had for quite a while. Volume 1 in the series, apparently, of, I guess, Masters of Terror. And that was a fantastic story. I bet you could find it online for free somewhere. Anyway, that wraps up my second week of Horror Mayhem. Some pretty fun stories, not a lot of them, but I hope you enjoyed my recounting of them and what I'm reading. Please tell me what you might be reading for this month if you are partaking of this event, this fun little event, giving people a chance to catch up on some short story reading in their horror, classic or otherwise genre. And I will catch you in the next video real soon. Take care and enjoy what you're reading. All the best. See you next time.